Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Literacy View. So, we have a very special show for tonight. I know you're all excited about it. We are live. I want to throw out a question to some of you. How many of you have spent thousands of dollars on a dyslexia evaluation outside of school? Well, I know I've worked with many parents, and they told me how difficult it is to book a psychologist and to get that evaluation and the expense that's involved. Well, let's talk about school now. When kids are in school, we would hope that it would be a way to evaluate kids right in school. And we're here to tell you that it can happen. So let's talk to our wonderful guests. We have people from the New York State Association of School Psychologists who were part of writing a document about evaluating for dyslexia in schools. And we're going to really look at that carefully. And we have them to answer questions. So the chat is open. As we get started, we'll try to address some of your questions. But let me introduce them quickly. We have Dr. Andrew Shanock. And Andrew, did I say your name wrong?
It's like panic, like Shanock, like panic.
Shanock, I do this all the time. I'm so sorry.
Please.
Shanock, like panic. He was in charge of the school psychologists. Weren't you the president of the school psychologists, the head of the board?
So it's very funny. So you have myself as a past president of NIASP, then you have Caci as a past president of NIASP, and then you have Michael Paff, who's the president-elect of NIASP.
Oh, wow.
There you go.
Whoa. So we have top people in the field, and we are super excited. Some people asked me, is this going to be all about New York? And we have a national crowd and an international crowd. So even though we have a New York state of mind going on tonight, we definitely are going to be talking about this for a wide group of people who are very interested in this topic. They're all excited to hear from you. And we are going to put the bio in the show notes. And here is Judy entering the stage. And we will put all the pertinent information into our new newsletter. So I hope you're all subscribing to the newsletter. This document will be in the newsletter. And
Great.
Other information is there. So please subscribe. It doesn't cost anything. And we'll get started. I see Judy now. Hello, Judy. All right. Let's get started. So we're going to take a deep dive into this document. And I think that we're just going to briefly start with the new definition of dyslexia. So before we even get into the document, there's been a lot of talk about this new definition and how it might impact the evaluation. So let's just talk about really what it was and what's different now about it. I saw Steve Dykstra's post on Facebook, and I shared it. And I thought he brought out some very good points. Let's start off with Andrew. If you could just tell us, and he's like, oh boy, it's starting with me. Let's start off with Andrew. Andrew, so Steve Dykstra talked about how right now the definition really encompasses that even though you might have a predisposition for dyslexia, I think that was the gist.
Yeah.
That kids are born with high risk, but it's not your destiny to actually have dyslexia if we catch these types of things early on and we address them early on, that it's not like you're born with it, even though it's neurobiological, but it means that you are at very high risk for having
Right.
reading and spelling problems and other issues that go along with dyslexia. So if you could maybe fine tune what I'm saying and
No,
tell.
I think you summarized it correctly of what Steve is talking about, and the definition I think came out like maybe 2 days ago or something like that. So it's just I think even on the IDA website, the last I looked, it was still the 2002 definition or an older definition. So it may not necessarily all be out there, but it does show like a little bit more broader understanding that's not just all about phonological awareness, and that it's kind of broadening out a little bit, although that's a major category of it. And I think it still holds on to the issue that the reading comprehension part is still that secondary result of dyslexia. And I bring that up, and I think Steve also brings that up in so many ways that, when people start thinking about reading, they always think about reading comprehension. So when any parent or teacher says he has difficulty reading, I know they're thinking reading comprehension. I don't know if they're really necessarily, and for no malice or anything, they're just not sure of what the underlying issues are, and which also impacts school psychologists about the type of evaluation we want to do. But also in terms of the background history that we try to get, sometimes we try to find out the family history. And if we find out that the family may have dyslexia, well, then those children may be at high risk, but that doesn't mean that they are destined for that. We still have to do the correct interventions in order for that kid to be successful as possible within the school built school walls.
So one thing I noticed, because I have a lot of parents who comment when we put things up, Judy knows, and one of the comments that I noticed was that someone was really upset about this change because it brings in the environment that kids are in. And this parent took it as though, well, is that blaming the parent? Because
Right.
when you talk about environment, does that mean you're blaming the parent? Could
Right.
one of you clarify what environment means when we're talking about dyslexia, so that parents do not feel guilty that they caused this, or that they were really ignoring it? Maybe someone could clarify what that means when we talk about environment.
I'll say one quick thing, and then I'll give it off to Mike, and then maybe Kelly could then comment, because these are things that we deal with all the time. But also, I think Kareem Weaver also talks about ultimately a lot. Kareem Weaver from Fulcrum is also doing a lot of stuff in New York. But ultimately, people, you go to a lot of different places and they want to blame poverty or culture on kids not being able to read, quote unquote, environment. And that is not an excuse. It's just not. We, as a school, as the professionals, the educated professionals, we have to be able to work with these kids and provide the correct interventions. That we're supposed to be the experts on this. So I think when we start thinking of environment, it's more around that kind of stuff. But there also might be a lower level of language maybe spoken within the home that could impact things, but it's not a blame or that it's a cause of anything. But that's one of those things that we have to look at in order to do an appropriate assessment at the end of the day. So I don't know, Mike, and then Kelly.
Yeah, I totally agree with what Andrew said. I'll say that, just backing up a little bit, I love the new definition. I'm reading through it, got it up on my phone right now. And thank you for sharing it, Andrew. One thing I appreciated is it encompasses the whole idea of this being a spectrum. And
Mhm.
I think it's a more usable definition, particularly for folks like me who mainly work with adolescents. And I could say more about this in a minute, but like I feel most of my cases of dyslexia, I feel like I don't find a pronounced phonological problem, but I find problems in other areas. But developmentally, that kind of makes sense to me. So I think that this definition is more workable. With the environment question, I mean, I can't imagine blaming a parent for their kid not learning to read easily. And I say it that way on purpose. Like I picked my words carefully there. They don't learn to read easily. Doesn't mean they're not going to learn to read. And it really points to when should they start learning, right? Early childhood experiences, of course, are important. Nobody would say, don't read to your kid or don't do anything before they hit kindergarten, right? But public schools are supposed to be a place where if it doesn't matter what your experiences are, we're going to come in and you have the right to appropriate, scientifically based quality instruction. That's where the responsibility is, right? And so once that starts to come online, we can really track who's picking up on this and who isn't, right? So in my mind, I don't make environment completely synonymous with curriculum because it's not. But in the ways that really matter, it kind of is, right? Within the realm of what we can control, working in public schools, that's the part of the environment we really need to focus on. So that's how I address that.
So Kelly, jumping off of what Andrew and Michael just said, let's kind of bring this document in at this point. So the definition has been expanded. Some people think it looks like War and Peace, right? They said it's so long. Some people don't like it, truthfully. I happen to agree with Michael. I do like it. I think that it
Faith, tell me a little bit more about what you like. Let's get really specific.
Okay. I'm glad you said that. So when I was looking at that, I was thinking to myself that I believe so much that instruction can change the course of everything.
100%.
I think that the definition really shows, instead of just accepting this as, oh, this is what I have, I think that it really shows that with the right factors, that instruction can mitigate and maybe even eliminate the reading issues. Now, there are other factors that impact it, like Andrew pointed out that reading comprehension is a secondary consequence, right? So there are other factors. And from what I know, speaking to Ashley Roberts, remember Ashley, a parent? Ashley has a son who went through different types of interventions, now is a teenager, and now has like executive functioning types of issues that he's faced with, right? And she's on top of it and trying to help with that. But like you said, Michael, older kids have different issues. It kind of morphs into other things where the phonology part might not be as prominent because either it was remedied or just as they get older, that's not one of the standout features. So we have to kind of look at this as kids move along on a continuum, like Michael mentioned before, about a continuum. So I do want to get to Kelly. So Kelly, we, the Literacy View, never had you on and we haven't spoken before, so welcome. So I want to know what's on my mind right now is, how did you come to this document? Because a lot of people out there are saying, they're calling BS on school psychologists, that they cannot evaluate for dyslexia. From what I was hearing, some parents were saying, I wouldn't trust school psychologists to do this. I'm being very honest right now. So we want to change their minds about this. That's the point of the show. So could you tell us how you came to this document, how all of you got together, because it is an excellent, excellent, excellent document. I hope other states look at it. I hope it's spread all over the place. I hope other countries look at it. I think it's such a good document. So if you jump in and share some of that.
Yeah, it's interesting. So we really came to develop this document based on similar concerns that you have just brought up, that there is a thought thought process, in school districts with parents, that school psychologists cannot evaluate and diagnose per se dyslexia within a school setting. And that is unfortunately a very broad myth that impacts our practice in the school setting, and impacts our ability to help kids eventually in terms of receiving support, or if we back up to looking at our involvement in screening, we have vast training in terms of understanding reading instruction, being able to evaluate for reading issues in addition to other issues. And unfortunately, there's a lot of misinformation in the education community that indicates that school psychologists are not equipped to do these kinds of evaluations, which was really false. And so,
or BS. So it's either.
Wait a minute. I just have to add, one of our viewers,
Right.
finally, Lindsay, thank you. My BS button finally has batteries. So, Andrew, do you need me to push it? Or not yet?
You gotta push it now. You're part of it.
Here I go.
Warning, bullshit alert.
Thank you. I finally got to say a word. Hi, everybody. I'm Judy Boxner. My tech wasn't working, but here I go. But continue, Kelly. Thank you.
That's okay. So we hoped that this document would empower school psychologists to recognize and celebrate their skills and their training, in addition to helping the broader education community and parents understand that you do have a trusted individual who actually knows your child for 7 hours a day in the school setting, and is able to help identify what your child needs. And Faith, what you were saying before in terms of like blaming the parent, the way I've never felt that blaming anyone is helpful or useful in any way. Kids come to us as they come, and they come with different levels of skills and different life experiences, and that's just who they are. And so being able to identify the areas that they need help, in addition to the areas where they have strengths, is really what school should be all about. And so instead of labeling, oh, you maybe have dyslexia, let's talk about the skills you need to develop, and so that we can prevent the need for a higher level of service moving forward.
So, Judy, you have some experience dealing with school psychologists and outside types of help. What are your thoughts in terms of looking at this document? Do you think that this would help start a conversation with all the other people involved with kids? Because I think that's so important. I feel like we've talked about this. There are silos in schools and people don't communicate. Do you think a document like this, where it kind of lays out, what's the role of each person and what types of tests are being used and what you should expect, do you think this would help in terms of communication in a school? What are some of your thoughts about it?
So I definitely think that we've all been talking, especially in New York City public schools, about dyslexia now since 2013. The word's been going back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And I think that schools have got better at understanding if a child is at risk. And I think that many teachers have got better at knowing if a child is at risk for dyslexia. I think the system has also gotten better at actually using the word dyslexia, because when I was in my former role, which I'm not embarrassed to say, because those were my roots, and I've moved on into the structured literacy world for many, many years now, since 2017. we were afraid as a system for many of us to even use the word dyslexia. In my prior training, I was told, shh, it doesn't exist. Oh, no. It's just because they haven't received the proper attention. So I think as a system, we've really moved far along in the process. Now, in terms of all parties working together in a school to help kids, I think that there's definitely still a disconnect. Like, for example, I attended the Big Sky Literacy Summit, which was hosted by Nell and Terry in Big Sky, Montana. Nell was an SLP. She was hosting a conference on language and DLD and dyslexia. And it was like, wow, so refreshing to see different members of literacy collaborating with each other. Now, in terms of school psychologists in a lot of our schools, they do have so much knowledge, but I don't think we all, even myself, know exactly what the school psychologists know. And the truth of the matter is, in a lot of schools, like in Connecticut, where I live, school psychologists actually counsel kids. In New York City, and in other schools in Connecticut, they actually counsel kids and actually also test kids. In New York City, a lot of the psychologists, from what I see, do a lot of the evaluation of kids. The teachers don't even know what they're evaluating for. We don't even fully all know what a school psychologist is fully trained in. Can they test for dyslexia? Can they not? Wait, let me finish, Faith. I'm not done. You had a little bit. Now it's my turn. So, we don't even know. Do they test for dyslexia? And the other thing is, it's coming up in so many conversations. Can we actually diagnose dyslexia at the school level? Can you not? Is it just going to be a speech and language impairment diagnosis? There's still a lot of confusion. If I'm going to be honest, there's still a lot of confusion. A lot of teachers want to know more. We want to support our kids more, but there's a lot of problems. And also later on, to those of you that are writing in the chat is open. We will be reading your questions, so keep them coming.
Just quick. So I'm very fortunate. I get to go around the country, and I go to a lot of speech language folks are inviting me to go to their conferences, so that we are working together, and that you can't almost do an evaluation without understanding language in the first place. So, but a lot of the stuff that you bring up, Judy, is just some of the things that school psychologists have to kind of overcome and show the things that we can do. And we can do counseling. We are involved in mental health. So we're speech language pathologists, by the way. So they should be doing mental health. But school psychologists have a big role in mental health, on top of all this other academic interventions, as well as trying to understand the different cognitive abilities of various kids. But just really trying to get to know the whole kid is what the school psychologist does, that we're a jack of all trades. And I know that, and Kelly and Mike could probably talk a little bit more about just the fact that we're in the schools and it's an exempt setting and what that means for us, but also some of the things that seem to impede us in places like New York City and maybe some other larger schools. So I'll stop there and let them talk about that.
Well, in this document,
in
this document, it says,
wait, Faith, I got to interject. I want to know a little bit more. So very directly, I'm going to ask, is every psychologist out there fully trained to give a diagnosis of dyslexia? Like, if I meet a psychologist in a school, are they all 100% on the same page?
You're asking two separate questions. So, and Kelly, I'm going to defer to Kelly because she knows the law. She's our legislative chair. She knows it like the back of her hand. But one thing I just want to highlight, legally allowed to is different from trained to, right? And I can talk more about that in a minute.
You're getting cheered. Hold on. Say that again.
Legally allowed to is different from are you trained to?
Bingo.
Right? That speaks to competence.
Cheer.
So, yeah. So, like I said, Kelly knows the law, and she'll. I want to defer to her, but I just felt the need to say that.
Right.
Thanks, Mike. Yeah, so it comes as a surprise to many people that school psychologists actually are legally allowed to diagnose not only dyslexia, but other diagnosable conditions within a school district. We are required to work in exempt settings, but the law, Education Law Article 153, Section 7605, indicates that school psychologists can do the same thing within an exempt setting that licensed psychologists can do in the community. So thereby, within New York State, that's New York State law, we are allowed to assess for and diagnose conditions within the school setting for educational purposes. Having said that, though, going back to what Mike said, everyone has to have a level of competency that enables them to do their work appropriately. And so that is our one caveat in the paper, is that if someone does not feel competent in terms of being able to do diagnostic activities within the school setting, that they're encouraged to pursue additional training. The other caveat is, in the event a school district has a board policy that restricts our practice of diagnosis in the school setting, then obviously you wouldn't be conducting that type of activity within your school district.
So if I could.
Wait, I gotta just stop for a second. There's a lot here because, Michael, what you said before about the difference between being legally able to and then actually able to are two different things. So it's the same thing with a reading specialist. How many reading specialists are called specialists, but they don't know how to deal with dyslexia? So those are two different worlds right now. And this is the problem in education. We have people that are legally able to do something and maybe supposed to do something. How many of them are going to say, I'm not competent? They're going to do the job. Maybe you, right? No. And it's true. Maybe you.
I'm competent at saying I'm incompetent to various things. So it's very good.
I could tell you, I've dealt with a lot of committees, and most people are not going to admit that they don't know how to do something and they're not able to interpret the results. I could assure you, I've sat in on many CSE meetings, and this is why parents think there's a conflict. So getting to the chat, who was it? It was
There's
Marilyn,
There's a lot of
somewhere, who said, what about a conflict? Being in a school and there's a conflict of interest where the school tone is, we don't talk about dyslexia, or we call it something else. And
That's funny that you say that, Faith, because Emily Smith said in her school, the school psychologists won't say the word dyslexia.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know what to say to that about that particular situation. If they're not saying it because they don't feel like they're competent to identify it, then they have two responsibilities here. One is admit that, you know what, that's not within my scope of practice right now, but let me get you some resources, right? Let me help anyway, because the other thing we haven't talked about is, as much as we encourage using the word and diagnosing, you still don't need to get an IEP, and I don't think you should need to, right? So if I'm a school psychologist who doesn't feel competent to diagnose dyslexia, I still know how to find a kid eligible with a learning disability and basic reading skills, and they should still get an IEP that meets their needs. I know that's not a satisfactory answer 100%, right? But that is bare minimum, that's the legal requirement. So we can't say people aren't doing their job if they're meeting the legal requirement, right? I don't want to come across as we're saying that every school psychologist has to diagnose, right? Because legally they don't. But the other responsibility there is recognize that of all the special ed classifications, specific learning disability is the most common. And what's the most common manifestation of a specific learning disability? It's a specific learning disability in basic reading skills. So if you're not competent to really identify the most common thing you're going to be evaluating for, there are ways out there to increase your level of competence, right? To grow your knowledge base. That's why I happily raised my hand when you said what school psychologist would admit it, because I've spent my career trying to expand my own scope of practice in areas of competence.
This is
right?
all very
That's just what professionals do.
Michael, this is
So
all very interesting to me because, like, I was under the assumption that all psychologists are trained in exactly the same battery of assessments, and that if they're not, I thought that they had to be up to date and be sent to professional training to make sure that they're all,
So
I didn't know
not
that.
really it's
Right.
not really about a battery of assessments. Like they all have their uses, and there are some tests out there that I find, and Andrew and Kelly could probably identify the ones that they prefer, right? Maybe we have similar ones, maybe we differ, but it's not about administering a battery, it's knowing what to do with the data. I could think of 5 different ways to measure phonological manipulation and rapid naming. But if I don't know how to make that kind of work in my head about what it means about a kid learning to read, then I'm still not evaluating for dyslexia, right? And I did see a comment that unfortunately school psychology sort of suffers from what a lot of other educational professionals or professions, I should say, do, which is this wide variation in training. I was super lucky. My initial training was steeped in the science of reading. We were devouring the National Reading Panel and we didn't pick up an IQ test until year 2, actually, right? My first year was all about learning theory and reading, but that's really unusual in the realm of school psychology. There are other programs out there, but, so it's really about just recognizing the limitations of your professional training, because once you're out in the world for a few years, I don't care where you went to grad school, what your knowledge base is starting to get stale, right? We all have to keep learning. The other thing I wanted to say is I don't necessarily see a conflict of interest being employed by a school district in diagnosing any more than I see a conflict of interest being employed by a school district in counseling a kid, right? It's literally part of my scope of practice and my job. And I think there would be a bigger ethical issue if I didn't use all of my skills, right? There's still the independent educational evaluation. I understand why parents might think anybody connected to a school is biased, because unfortunately that's been the experience of a lot of parents, right? And I mean, we're obviously, the 3 of us in NIASP are really trying to correct that perception, but I get it. I get why it exists, and I'm not judging it. But I don't think the solution is to give up and say, well, I can't really help. As a school employed professional, I'm going to demonstrate that I can help.
I know that Kelly wanted to just jump in for a half-second, Faith. I know.
No, that's all right. I think covered it pretty well. I guess one important piece though too is that we know the kids across the years, across the school day, and understand the whole child. And and this is no offense to anyone who's doing an IEE outside of school, but that experience occurs really in a vacuum for the student. And the student's progress and performance in school across the days and the years is really an important part of the evaluation that, we as, school district employees know these children and bring that information to our evaluations.
And could you say overall, just giving everyone grace, all educators, how well do they know reading? How well do they know writing? How well do they know math? That we're supposed to know all these things. But when you start to really pull the curtain back, people are unsure of themselves. That how many teachers, and again, no malice is meant, but if I ask them how many people are bad at math, a whole bunch of people say they're bad at math. I'm like, well, that's an important skill. especially when you're teaching the little ones. So it's for all of us, is to improve our knowledge base and how to do it and how we can do it together and communicate more about the different professional levels that we have.
So, what are the implications for other states and, excuse me, and outside of this country? Because this is a problem that so many parents are facing. And, I'm listening to all of you. And yes, Kelly, that does make sense that the person who's in-house would know that child best. But then, you know what? If that were true in terms of it really happening, then all these people who go outside the school, they wouldn't have a lineup. There's like 6-month waiting list to get tested or more. I mean, I hear from parents all the time, they can't even get appointments. These people are so busy testing. So there has to be something going on that's wrong in the school. There's a disconnect.
I'll say part of it is that when schools will say that we don't do that here, but we do it here. We are supposed to be doing that in the schools. So especially especially in some places like around New York City, I'll say that you'll see that the districts will say, we're not going to do this go out and get an evaluation outside. That'll be quicker. That'll be something else.
Why are they doing that, Andrew? Because we do, people do
Right.
hear that often.
Right.
And the other thing that I learned when I attended this literacy conference, I heard that you don't even have to be a school psychologist, that you could actually be a classroom teacher and screen as well, do a deeper.
You start wading into different waters about who's screening and what does a screen mean and what type of, like say they're doing curriculum-based measurements. So maybe they're doing that as some type of screener that a teacher may want to do. But getting deeper and really understanding the whole process about reading or writing or literacy overall, that may be where the school psychologist is going in. But there are places like South Carolina or North Carolina. I get the Carolinas mixed up. I don't know. They both look alike, those Carolinas. But that they say that you can't say dyslexia. You have to say they have symptomology of dyslexia. So can you imagine being in that meeting and you say your child has symptomology of dyslexia, and then the parent says, is it dyslexia? Well, there's symptoms of dyslexia. That seems odd. So in New York, at least we had those cuffs off of us that we can actually use the term dyslexia, but we really need to, but school psychologists themselves have to understand what it is and have a deeper understanding so we do a better evaluation. And we can do those, especially if we use our colleagues like the SLP, like the OT, and like some of our reading specialists as well. So I know I'm Kelly. I know I cut you off there. I'm sorry.
No, you didn't. I was interrupting you, which is a bad habit of mine. I do want to jump in and say that there's federal guidance about school psychologists should be allowed and encouraged to identify dyslexia and share it with stakeholders, teachers, parents. That citation is also in our dyslexia document. So, beyond New York State, there is very specific guidance from the federal level that we are in fact able to identify dyslexia in the schools. And so it does go beyond New York State.
So,
Faith, I just got to jump in for a second. I'm telling you, there's a lot of burning questions. I'm in the field. I hear a lot of different things. What I've been hearing, and I know a lot of people are going to challenge even what they see on this podcast today, is that people that are not psychologists can look for dyslexia. They could look for DLD. I know that there's the Diamond assessment that's out there. I know that there's other ones that are out there. I heard that you don't have to be a psychologist to start digging deeper. I really want to gain some clarity on that for sure, because I know I can screen. I know how to use Acadians, but like even in the schools, and I'm not a big fan of iReady, but there was at some point an iReady thing online that said that kids were maybe at risk for dyslexia or had dyslexia. So there's a lot going on. And I'm sure that there's a lot of teachers here going on. A lot of these teachers might be like, wow, I didn't know my school psychologist could diagnose dyslexia. B, there's still probably confusion on whether the school psychologist in their building does have that training or doesn't. And now a lot of people are probably going to ask their school psychologists tomorrow, which is interesting. But like I said, I think that from what I've been hearing, it doesn't have to be a school psychologist. I wish that it could be a school psychologist, but I think a lot of people in the classrooms right now are really stressing out because they have a lot of kids in their class that are showing being at risk for dyslexia, but they're not really sure if their kid is dyslexic. And I know a lot of the kids that I'm servicing in my own school are very poor. Their parents would have no money to even know where to start looking. So I guess, a great place to start looking might be the school psychologist. But like I said, there's just really a lot of confusion, and I think we need to break it down on a very
we can help do that. So Mike will go first a little bit, and then we'll all chime in about that.
Because not everybody's faith in Judy that have been doing this for a long time, right? There's a lot of maybe first-year teachers, second-year teachers, and they're confused and they're worried about kids. So how do we really simplify it for them?
So the first thing I want to say, I just had a thought when you said only a psychologist. Speaking as one, I get nervous about saying only a psychologist or only a blank insert professional title can do blank, because I can think of Sally and Benny Shaywitz. They're not psychologists, right? They're medical doctors, but I would trust them to do this. There are professionals out there in allied fields, and I would never say it would be impossible for one of them to get the training and experience, right? So on an individual level, I think there are going to be exceptions, but let's remember what you need to do in schools, and let's be New York specific for a minute, but this also tracks onto federal law. Any referral for special education needs to include a psychological, right? Only in New York State, only a school psychologist or a licensed psychologist can do that. And so no referral is complete without that, and that person needs to be involved. At the same time, deciding a kid meets a classification, that's a team decision, right? Now, the team decision should be based on the recommendations of all the professionals involved. So when I worked in public schools, I certainly ran into situations where, as part of my evaluation, I would diagnose blank, right? Let's take it out of the realm of dyslexia. Let's keep it simple. Let's say this kid's clearly got ADHD, but they didn't need special education. They were doing well. They didn't need an IEP. I'm diagnosing something, but the committee as a whole, the team, isn't finding them eligible. So there are like two levels of decisions here that we're talking about, right? And again, you don't even need to diagnose to find eligibility. So I think that's another reason that there is confusion. But absolutely, a school psychologist needs to do an evaluation for any classification decision. You can't have an evaluation that results in an IEP without that person being involved, right?
Michael, can I just jump in for a second? In the document, it says here, dyslexia and reading assessment are not owned by one profession or professional because there are overlapping areas.
Right.
So I think when I hear you speak, you're saying as far as the referral goes, but other professions could recognize this if they're able to use the same types of tests. For instance, in the document, it said that the CTOP2 could be used by a speech and language pathologist. And so there would be no reason to do it again with the psychologist because it was done already by SLP. So if some of the same testing goes, there could be other people recognizing this, but are you talking about making the actual referral? Is that what you?
No, I'm talking about making the ultimate decision about, does this kid, again, have X and need an IEP? That's to your point, you're right. I mean, I could sit on a CSE where somebody else did the academic test, somebody else did the CTOP. And what's my role? It's not to repeat testing. That'd be dumb. It's to help everybody put it all together and figure out what does it mean for the kid, right?
But Mike, I will say that what does happen is that people do repeat the testing because people aren't necessarily talking. So the kid gets, the one whole battery that's the same as another battery, and everyone's just doing in their own little thing. And I hate the word silos. But it's about how you're trying to communicate and how you're trying to work with as a team. And the school psychologist should lead that discussion. But it's all based on that reason for referral, and it's also based on the intervention. It's also based on the curriculum. You know that there are schools in New York that are still using Fontes and Pinnell, still using Use to Study, and they're still doing that stuff. And then you also have that around the country. So then how are we identifying dyslexia if the kid wasn't taught how to read? So it becomes a real interesting thing that you have to use all those professions to help out. I know Kelly, in terms of some of the experience as well that she has around some of this. So I'm sorry to interrupt, Kelly.
No, you're not interrupting, Andrew.
Okay.
I just kind of want to circle back. We've been talking a lot about teachers, not being able to understand or identify dyslexia, but I would argue we've been calling dyslexia a reading disorder for as long as I've been a school psychologist. And teachers in a classroom can identify the skill deficits that their students have in order to understand they need to be remediated. So, there's always been this mystique around dyslexia that it's somehow a life sentence, that it's somehow untreatable. We haven't until, recently across the last several years, really starting to talk about dyslexia within the school setting. And so people are still very hesitant to identify it or talk about it or say they can assess for it because of this mystique or misunderstanding about what exactly it is. Meanwhile, we've been identifying reading disorders forever in schools. But I wanted to circle back to something Judy said, I think, in terms of people talking about teachers identifying dyslexia. We outlined subtests within the document, and I think that there is definitely overlap. So a lot of the subtests that a special ed teacher might do in a special ed evaluation in the academic testing are things that we're going to look at to see if those results are consistent with dyslexia. So maybe that's where those comments are coming in, that teachers who are using the standardized academic assessments are actually doing some of the testing for dyslexia, even though they're not saying that in their reports or identifying that in their practice.
And just to say that what I talk about in various districts and kind of going around different places is how to do a good collaborative evaluation, so that if the SLP does certain subtests, I may add in certain things, but we write one report in one voice rather than a whole bunch of people just putting in their stuff, and it becomes really it goes from like Dr. Seuss to Shakespeare to just like a red book, red fish, blue fish kind of thing. It just doesn't read right because it's not one type of collaboration around things. And also in terms of the assessments, that people just look at the scores and not about how the kid got there in the first place. So how a kid may perform, if you say a standard score, a crappy standard score, like say a 75, well, what does that mean? What did the kid do to do that? And some people, especially I'll go to meetings and people are like, oh, what is this 75? That must be bad. This must be a disability. I'm like, slow down. We have to figure out what happened. What was that test about? What was going on? One kid performing within the average range doesn't mean another kid who performed in the average range did the same exact thing. So that's where some of the details really start to come to effect. And that's where part of the training as a school psychologist comes into effect. And lots of programs do start to deal with what is reading, what is writing, what is math. So we do a good job of identifying these specific learning disabilities. So Mike, I know you.
Oh, I was just going to echo, regardless of how much your school psychologist knows about reading, their training program absolutely taught them to observe behaviors during testing and to really think through beyond just the standard score, right? So that is something that any school psychologist can contribute to the evaluation, even if they don't think that they know much about dyslexia.
So I think you mentioned learning disabilities and you mentioned dyslexia. Is dyslexia a learning disability?
Mike, you want to take that?
Oh, Kelly, you were first. Go ahead.
Yeah. Yes, it can be. It's a reading disability, and that's how we identify it in school. Is a learning disability in the area of reading.
Mm-hmm.
So then let's talk about special ed services, because if it's a learning disability, not all kids with dyslexia are getting special ed services. It's very confusing.
Right. Right. So
And I
that's
want to just throw in one term also. And for some kids, and I can give an example, and I'm not going to name the student, but I work with privately. I have a kid that I'm working with who's in 4th grade. He's learning to read very quickly with me because Faith introduced me to a tool known as the Hornet and the Wasp. And he's learning to read very quickly. But it brings me back to what Andrew said. You have to think about the whole picture. What did 1st grade look like? There was COVID for him during 1st grade. Did he have strong teachers? Is it dyslexia or is it dyslexia? And that's why also a lot of teachers and people like me are very frustrated, because I think right away, a lot of people jump the gun that may not know the answers, and they'll be like, he's dyslexic, she's dyslexic. They forget about that. It could be a whole bunch of different things like DLD, developmental language disorder. It could be dyslexia and developmental language disorder, or it could just be dyslexia, or it could be dyslexia and being predisposed to being at risk for dyslexia. So I think that sometimes people, even like myself, get a little bit frustrated. And I think it's hard when we don't have concrete answers about certain situations.
I'll add to that. Kids with dyslexia, kids with a mixed reading disorder, like you talked about, language and difficulty with reading, or someone with developmental language disorder, that those three, all districts I go to, I'll show the different constellation, for lack of a better term, of what those things may look like. And then I'll ask everybody, do they all get different? Should they all get different interventions? They all say yes. I say, do they all get different interventions? They all say no. So nobody knows. People are unsure what to do within the schools to address some of the needs to deal with all those different areas that you're talking about. And so it is looking at the back. It is, and especially dealing with COVID right now, that 5th grade teachers all have kids who didn't learn for 2 years. So all the kids are reading at a 3rd grade level, and suddenly they're magically all dyslexic. Well, that's insane. It's what were the interventions that we did and how we're trying to think about it and what type of dose of good interventions we need to do at tier 1. But that is scary for a lot of educators because they're unsure of what that intervention should look like in their regular ed classroom. For no malice, it's because they weren't necessarily trained in it, or it's what are those different tools that's available within that district to show them. But there's lots of good free resources on the internet that school psychologists should be able to share with those teachers. And I have really good, like 1 or 2 minute videos to be able to do that. People who are familiar with like Anita Archer in terms of explicit instruction, she has some great videos. If you go to the Reading Universe, the Reading Universe is a great website. It has a whole taxonomy. You click a button and it gives you all free lesson plans, all free, about what to do. But that's where the school psychologists come in and say, here's the different lesson plan. This is maybe you want to try to do, be able to work all that out. So I'm sorry, go ahead, Mike.
No, I was going to say, that's why our document includes what does reading instruction, what should it look like at tiers 1, 2, and 3? Because we really can't address the needs of the kids with dyslexia unless we can't truly do it. Unless they get good core instruction, and that meets the needs of everybody. It's also why we put in a lot of information about the active view of reading, right? We think school psychologists should help the teams that they work with be up to date with what the science is actually saying about how kids learn to read and how all these different processes work together to facilitate that and work together with instruction, right? Yeah, so I mean, one of those resources that you can share, or if your school psychologist wants more information, share the document. It's in there, right? And we have references. Shameless plug, come to our conference in Ithaca in a few weeks. We have a
My
lot
son
of
goes
stuff
to
going
college,
on.
my son's a student at Ithaca College. So when he comes back from China, my next stop is maybe to see you guys.
Okay,
Awesome.
this is good.
Come on
We have
up.
cookies,
Yeah,
we have food. We'll bring you in. It's okay.
Faith,
Right.
the chat is exploding. You got to go after the chat. I feel
We
bad.
I just said one thing that people are just thinking that special ed is the place where that is to get extra help. That's not what it's for. What are the interventions we're doing prior to help these kids along? And so what happens in a lot of places, we're doing sympathetic learning disabilities rather than specific learning disabilities, because we say special ed is extra help. That's not the case.
Andrew, I'm going to challenge you. I want you to go a little deeper. You just said,
Yeah, but I know you have other things in the comments, so I'll come back to
what
that.
you just said. Wait, that was
Yep.
very interesting. The part about the sympathetic. Can you repeat that and explain that a little bit?
Yeah, that we know those kids are struggling. Nobody knows necessarily what to do with those kids. So we say that we'll send them to special ed because they will cure them, because they somehow have magic healing powers. But they also, the special ed who work their tails off, the kids in special ed work their tails off. But that special ed teacher needs to understand how to work with some of the certain kids in reading, writing, or math. Now think of multilingual kids. I had one kid who was just learning English for 2 years. They said, we can't teach him in regular ed, so we'll make him special ed. But the special ed teacher didn't know how to work with multilingual kids. So that's a problem. They were just identifying in order for that kid to be quote unquote protected. So they may get extra time on things or get less homework or whatever it might be to address some of the more about accommodations and modifications rather than the specific interventions. Nobody means any malice by it. In fact, they're trying to help out that kid. But we see a lot of times these kids aren't necessarily helped, as we see a lot of kids in special ed. If you look at their reading proficiency, it doesn't necessarily go up. That's a problem that we have to address and acknowledge.
So you mentioned before, Michael, about the active view of reading. And most people know the rope, but they don't know the active view of reading, and which is more detailed and it has a lot more to it. And one of the things I found interesting in the active view of reading was this breakdown, including the bridging processes. And, and I thought there was a really strong effect by bringing that in. Could somebody talk about what that is? Because most of the time we address dyslexia with just word reading issues, make sure that they have the decoding skills and the spelling skills. But now you mentioned self-regulation in this document. You mentioned language comprehension in the document. You mentioned a bridging process in the document, including fluency and some other bridges to comprehension. And it looked like there was a 0.70 effect size, which is very powerful, more than some of the other areas. Could somebody please explain that to parents and teachers out there? Because I think people feel like once they get a decoding program, that's it. Life is good and they're going to be just fine. But this active view of reading really says a lot more about what needs to be done, or what at least the possibilities are for kids who might have mastered some things, but they still have other things that need to be addressed.
Right. And that also gets to my point about working with adolescents, because like I said, I've noticed, and probably 95% of the people I work with are adolescents and college age adults, right? And almost without exception, when I do an evaluation for dyslexia, I can predict that their standard score on every measure of phonological awareness or manipulation that I could possibly throw at them is going to be like an 89, you know? And it's the kind of score that drives a school psychologist crazy, because you're like, it's not great, but it's not a disability, right? It's a relative weakness. It's not strong, but it's not weak enough for me to do anything with, you know? But that's just if you're looking at the number. And if you look beyond the number and what got the person there, right? What I'm usually seeing in like a 16 or a 17-year-old with that score for phonological awareness is that if I had tested them 10 years ago, that weakness would have been much more pronounced. But usually because they've gotten some good instruction and they're working their butts off and they're trying hard, right? They have managed to kind of sort of close the gap. Now, it doesn't mean they're not dyslexic just because they're at like the 23rd percentile, right? If I dig deeper and look at rapid naming or look at reading fluency or look at those comprehension problems that the new definition mentions, right? And that the active view of reading, some of these things that they call bridging processes, that's where I usually pick up on much more pronounced weaknesses. And that's where we can now target intervention. You know, Duke, Cartwright, and Burns did amazing work with tracking the active view of reading to effect sizes for intervention. So, yeah, if you're a teacher out there and you're hearing this and you only know Scarborough's reading rope, that's great. This isn't like, don't throw that out. It's just the new evolution of that, and thinking about how this develops as kids get older and how it interacts with instruction. And also that even though I still love the rope visual, right? But it does present these two strands as if they're completely separate. And then we kind of weave them together. But like if you picture a rope, you can still pick out the discrete strands. The brain just doesn't work like that. Most of this is diffuse and it's happening in different parts of the brain. And it's the bridging processes really go a long way toward describing that, I think.
And if you look at Christopher Such's work, Such, he has a great book about just like the primer about teaching, but he also has a really nice, not decision tree, but almost a flow chart that really does show the connection between language and decoding, and somehow vocabulary could impact both the language and decoding. But also when you look at older kids, when it comes to like trying to read multisyllabic words, that if their working memory might be off, they may not be able to they need a lot more exposure to that word for them to be able to then be able to recognize it with more immediacy. So some of these adolescents, when they're little, they're able to do it because they're reading Fox on Box. They can do that. But then once the language and the word structure gets more complicated, working memory could also impact something like that.
All right,
but it doesn't mean that we have to do an intervention for working memory. We have to do the intervention about reading rather than thinking about doing it for working memory per se.
All right, so let's go to the chat. We've been talking for an hour and people are anxious to have their questions answered. Judy,
Have they been nice? Have they been nice?
They've been actually really nice. I think people are just really feeling passionate about this topic.
Good.
And so now I have to scroll back a while because we were talking for a little while. And I will just read comments that I don't even know what I'm going to say, but I'm just going to go for it because it's the literacy view and anything goes on the literacy view. Okay. Somebody said, you read my mind, Judy. Psychologists and SPED teachers won't use the word dyslexia sometimes unless an outside evaluation was done. Anybody want to say anything? Or we covered that. And then
I like when people say you can't say dyslexia, I'm like, okay, watch me. Dyslexia, magic. I don't understand.
You know what? But yeah, we can make a joke, but
I understand.
But in school, that is no problem. It really is a true problem.
But that's where education matters, and really trying to get people to understand that we can say dyslexia and not be scared about it, to be able to do that.
Well, and I think we can respectfully challenge people and say, why not? Why not? You know, and then there's really nothing to back anyone up when they say you can't say that in school. Well, says who? Right. Why not?
Here's another one.
True? Wait, I just have. Is that true of other states, or is that just a New York thing? Because I want to be clear that people listening are from all over, and they have these issues. And I want them to be confident
Yes.
that this is
In other states, they, like I said, you could only say symptomology of dyslexia. You cannot say dyslexia.
All right,
Mike?
here's another one. Here's another
So
one.
I started, I'm sorry.
Oh, sorry.
I started my career in Pennsylvania.
Right.
Although I always follow that up by saying, but I'm a New Yorker. I was born here. Okay.
Yeah.
I just happened to move there for college. So that's where I got my start. And yes, it was exactly the same dynamic. I think I've shared before, I was in a school district that paid Fountas and Pinnell lots of money to train everybody. And I've been to their training. So I was steeped in that balanced literacy after graduating from the grad program I told you about. But yes, there was a perception that we can't say dyslexia, and the rules in Pennsylvania were pretty much the same. We could, right? And so when I began doing what Kelly suggested and pushing back and saying, well, why? Show me in state law where I can't. And I shared some of the federal resources that Kelly mentioned before. Everybody was like, oh, I guess we can. Cool. So some states do restrict the language, but I know Pennsylvania does not.
All right, here we go, because we have 1,000,001 comments coming in the chat. Someone said, Marilyn said, someone explained why school district evaluations almost always show the student is reading at a higher grade level than the result of a comprehensive evaluation by a licensed neuropsychologist. Do you have any feedback on that one?
I think that might be just some type of experience that someone may have had, but especially when it comes to reading level, people should not be reporting any grade equivalent based on any performance. So it's just because it's not the case. So if a kid has a raw score, some people convert to a grade equivalent and they'll say that kid is at a third grade level. But it doesn't mean that kid could only read third grade text. It means because if the kid was in sixth grade, the kid has had more years of text experience. And so people just say grade equivalent because they say that parents understand that term. But it's complete fabrication. So anytime they start talking about grade equivalent, it's nonsense.
Right.
So that annoys me so much, honestly, listening to that parents can't understand.
Right.
I mean, really,
it's annoying that people said that if you explain things and you explain, like, don't people get into standard score, a percentile rank, but just talk about what the kid could do. And if I say the kid could read consonant, vowel, consonant words, but can't read consonant, vowel, consonant, letter E words, and the kid is 6 years old, everyone will be okay. But now what happens if the kid is 16 years old? Do you care that whatever that grade equivalent? That's terrible. We need to address that skill. And if we talk about the performance, it makes much more sense. And I want the parents to be able to advocate for their kid after I worked with that kid.
I need to ask you something, and it's not in the chat. Why are so many of our kids slipping through the crack? I've seen too many kids slipping through the crack. I think the system is failing so many kids. I see kids that are struggling, definitely struggling in first grade. Then they're still struggling in fourth grade. How are we as an educational system, and no politics allowed, how are we as a system allowing this to continue to happen, that there's so many kids that are going through the grades and they're still struggling? I myself have seen somebody retained 3 times in first grade, clearly dyslexic, and the system did nothing for that child.
I think education in general is a broken system. There's so many systemic issues that impact a student's learning. We have school districts purchasing ineffective reading programs and telling the teachers this is what you need to use. We have shortages of teachers. We have shortages of school psychologists. There are people citing these things in the chat. There's just not enough people to try to intervene.
Yeah.
Go ahead,
And
So
I'm sorry, a couple of, so that it comes from higher ed of how we're training everyone, number one. but that we can't do for the convenience of adults. We have to do it for the kids. But if we just do it for the adults, then we start to miss the kids and then we do a bad job. But all that being said, the miracle that goes on in all schools, it's amazing what goes on in schools all the time. I go to different classrooms. I'm like, what are they learning in this? There's no way they're learning this now. This is insanely great. So we could, the stuff there's clearly are cracks. There has to be. But if we're not focused on the great things that all these different districts and all these different schools are doing and all these different people are doing, we really miss things. And that's why we have so much burnout, because we just get all this pressure that schools are failing here, schools are failing there. There's no doubt that we could do better. When we know that there should be 95% reading proficiency and we're at 34%, that's a problem. Yeah. But also we need to start moving in the right direction. Go ahead, Mike.
I'm sorry. I just thinking of kids who fall through the cracks. Within the last year, I've taken a new position. I've left public schools. I work with adjudicated and incarcerated adolescents in 4 of our Division of Juvenile Justice and Opportunities for Youth facilities. It's a really long name.
He's a very big business card.
Yeah. So these are all kids who have, criminal convictions and are incarcerated. A lot of my job is doing evaluations for these kids and then consulting with their educational and clinical teams. And so I can tell you, I haven't met a youth yet who didn't fall through the cracks, literally. They stopped attending school. They were displaying behaviors that got them suspended. And so we really also have to think about all the things, the systematic and systemic things that drive kids into the system. A lot of it has to do with systemic racism, writing off kids who show oppositional behaviors as being oppositional and showing purposeful behaviors when really they're manifestations of academic frustration, right? A whole lot of my kids also have not received really good evaluations in a long time. And a lot of that is because they never showed up to school to get them, right? But it means that signs were missed early on and then they were sort of pushed out of the system. So I agree with Andrew that amazing things are happening. I would also say we really have to focus on the responsibility of our schools to meet the needs of every single kid, regardless of race, home language, ethnicity, or behavior, right? And a lot of that starts with improving tier 1. If we had really good, robust reading instruction, we would have a lot more kids who weren't getting suspended and weren't winding up involved with the justice system.
That's right. 100%.
We also have to abandon practices that we know don't work, like retention. Judy brought retention up. There's little to no benefit in retaining a child because they haven't mastered the curriculum. And so, until such time we abandon those practices that actually harm kids and we start using, evidence-based instructional practices, we're going to continue to see struggling kids.
Understand in other states, they're saying that if you don't pass a statewide test, you will be retained. Unless you've been identified with some type of disability, then you get moved on to the next grade. Right. So that gives, a purpose or a reason to maybe identify a kid so they don't get retained.
Yeah, that's...
I don't want to go off on a tangent.
Sorry.
Because, no, I think that, that's a very different issue as far as
another episode.
But if we stick to just this document and the benefits of having it laid out for people in terms of what are their roles and responsibilities and how do we help these kids, is it possible to avoid? I think that's what parents want to know. And I think people in the schools need to know, is it possible to avoid having to go through that whole process of trying every tier along the way, and then finally, after a very long time, having to go outside of the school and then waiting yet again for a private person to do an independent evaluation. Are we saying that this, if we do it right, using, a strong sense of collaboration in a school and having common understanding, could we minimize some of the damage?
Yes.
Yes.
I think people need
Right.
to know that
Yes.
that is possible.
And also, it goes to doing, to get back to the point about what happens when the school evaluation shows better results than the independent evaluation. I actually had another explanation for that I think happens sometimes, and I've seen it being a school practitioner as well as somebody who does evaluations. I'm licensed too, so I do these IEs a lot of the time. If I do, like, let's say I do the Woodcock-Johnson test of achievement, right? Form A, and then Kelly a month later does Form B. It's the same test, okay, on the same kid. But if I just do the brief reading tests, 2 subtests, and Kelly adds the subtests that really dive down into decoding and phoneme graphing knowledge and rapid naming and fluency, I could easily look at my 2 tests and say, oh, this kid is fine. And Kelly will find serious weaknesses, right? So it's not just what test did you use, it's how in-depth was the evaluation, which is one reason the 3 of us here are really passionate about getting school psychologists to kind of understand you need to do more than the brief clusters. You really need to do a really in-depth evaluation. Now, to Andrew's point, that could mean, hey, the special ed teacher did the CTOP, you don't need to redo that. But figure out what it means for the kid, right?
Now,
Let's collaboratively do a good evaluation.
Michael, you're using names of tests. I might know them, Faith might know them, but can you break them down for some of our viewers that might not have ever heard of some of these evaluations?
You should have heard of them. Good God.
Yeah. So, any test, it's going to have a number of different subtests that tap different skill areas, right? But all of these academic tests have 1 or 2 tests that you put together and you get this cluster called like reading, right? Or a reading composite. And very often those are things like word reading and comprehension. There's no fluency. There's no real phonics. You could just be reading sight words and do okay. And so whether it's the Woodcock-Johnson, it's the Weschler, it's the Kaufman's, whatever test out there, there are also supplemental tests that dig deeper. And that's what I'm saying people really need to do. And that might explain why some parents have the experience of, well, the school said my kid is fine, but this independent guy said he's not, right? If the school did a briefer evaluation, which unfortunately, it doesn't happen everywhere, but I've seen it. School psychologists are busy, they're overworked, the caseload is huge. They stop when they get that initial cluster. Unfortunately, that is opening up the opportunity for somebody outside of the school to say, they didn't do an in-depth evaluation. This kid really does have weaknesses. In that case, I think it's on us as school practitioners to say, we got to do better there, right? And we have to advocate with our administration to give us the resources to do better there.
Right. And there's also just a quick thing about the independent evaluations that the school just has to consider it. They don't have to buy into it. Just because the outside person may have said something doesn't mean the school has to comply or follow along. And again, I know lots of great independent evaluators, but also I know lots of independent evaluators that if once I see their name on the report, I know word for word what their report's going to say. That it's going to be some type of visual processing issue where the kid needs colored lenses and maybe dolphin therapy, because that independent value, it comes up to the same thing every single time. So it's really trying to work with those people in the field while also working with the people within the school building as well. So trying to get all those opinions really matter.
All right. Are there any other comments? We have a lot here, and we can't possibly address everything.
And one thing popped up that, yes, if we do a better job with tier one, then we could do much better by all kids all the time, period. End of discussion. But that's not happening. Most school districts, if it's supposed to be only like 15% that are tier two, tier three. I go to different districts around the country. All of them are telling me 40 to 50%, 50% are at tier two, tier three, which means that tier one is not working and tier two and tier three are overwhelmed. And you cannot possibly do the I do, you do, we do thing with 17 kids and one teacher. That ain't happening. It looks good on paper. They're getting tier three, but tier three is absolutely positively not happening.
And right, sometimes it's not happening, and sometimes there's not enough manpower in the building, and that's used as an excuse. And it's just not an excuse. But how do we recommend to buildings that are struggling with maybe teacher shortages, or, you know, tier one instruction is decent, but what if there's not enough time in the literacy block for these things?
So that's where I need to see where the kids are at that I want to know how we're, I worked in Philadelphia school district. At the time, all urban districts were a standard deviation below the norm. Philadelphia was a standard deviation below urban districts. Good God. The top 85% kids there in general are my tier one. The bottom 15% are my tier two, tier three. As the administrator, I need to move that whole Philadelphia district up so they're not so far below, but dealing with the resources I have as a district, there's no way I could deal with all those kids. But the bottom 15% in that district at that time are really low. That's where I need to focus my interventions, but also making sure that tier one is really super solid, building in language, building in word reading, building in good numeracy, building in good spelling, and making sure all those things are covered and social emotional learning as well. So
there's also some systemic things that can be done, like not having our reading specialists do lunch duty. You know, building more time in for intervention than, you know, wasting our time. You know, obviously we have to do student supervision, but it's a waste of time, you know, for the speech language pathologist to be doing bus duty when she could be seeing kids for speech improvement, and, you know, the reading specialist the same way.
I was one of those people. Just what you said. You know, pulled the nonsense when could have been doing something more productive. Yeah,
right.
Let's wrap up. So I would like each one of you to give parents and teachers, anybody out there listening, 3 things that you would share about and 3 things you want to call BS on. Because when parents go into these CSE meetings, they are often unprepared unless they have an advocate with them, which again costs more money. And it's very intimidating to be in that situation. So could you give them something that you would say, yeah, this is a really positive thing to think about, 3 things that are really positive that you see, and 3 things that you could warn them about that's BS, and to give them a heads up on for each one of you?
I get so when I go into IEP meetings, the first thing especially as an independent evaluator, I could definitely do this, but I'll go, does everybody here agree that Johnny's a good boy? Yes? Good. Does everyone here agree that he can't read? Yes? Good. Let's just cut to the chase. Tell me where the kid's baseline is. Tell me where you want him to go and show me the data. Most places don't have any data. They'll say a star number, but they don't know what that star number means, or an iReady number, but they don't know what that number means. And so what in IEP meetings that you have each year, generally focus on the accommodations and modifications, because the IEPs, if you look at the present level of performance or the PLOPs or the PLEPs, it's different in different states, generally don't have good baselines. They say he's having a hard time reading. And then you look at the IEP, it says he's going to do 3 out of 4 times read certain words. Well, how many words can he read now? They'll never have that. So as an advocate, you have to say, tell me his baseline, and then how did you come up with this as a goal? And then what data are you going to provide me over the months so I could see that? So I should be able to come in any month and be able to see another piece of data showing that kid's making the right amount of progress. And generally that doesn't happen. So that's the big part about things where parents can really advocate.
I'd like to say that I think that I like to view kids and parents and educators as we're all trying our best. And sometimes our best doesn't come across as looking good enough. And so we have to step away from trying to place blame and really focus on what we need to do to support the child. And that's, unfortunately, when there are strained interactions and strained relationships, and I've had parents say, I'm fighting for my kid, and I've said, why are you fighting? We're not fighting. We have to work together. When we have these perceptions of we need to fight for this or we need to do that in order to get something, it just creates animosity and not a really good situation to help the student moving forward, to keep the relationship open between the family and the evil CSE committee. And so, my hope would be that there would be collaboration and conversation. I would encourage parents to try to cut through the psychobabble and say, we need to speak in plain language. And parents, I hope, would be empowered to ask what we mean if we're saying something that doesn't make sense. I just would hope that instead of the CSE coming across as something that has to be surmounted, that it really needs to, we need to work toward it being a team effort.
Yes. Well said.
I don't really know how to follow up what Andrew and Kelly said because I just agree. I agree so much. I think in addition to that, one thing I would say is just don't lose sight of the fact that dyslexia, and this is true for any learning disability, really, the social emotional effects are real as well, right? And in some kids, this spills over into behavior. So, I've definitely found myself, now almost every youth I work with, but even when I worked in public schools, almost defending kids who were doing kind of nasty, not nice things, right? Not to excuse the behavior, because, we got to deal with behavior, but to understand that it's very likely coming from a place where they have spent years and years in school seeing everybody else get it and they're not, and realizing that it's not because they're not trying, right? Feeling stupid, even though we know dyslexia is not linked to IQ. You can have dyslexia at any level of IQ. IQ doesn't predict reading that well, right? They're basically not related, but it doesn't feel that way if you're the only kid in class and you think everybody else is a better reader than you are. So the social emotional effects are real, and that's got to be part of the CSE discussion. At some point, especially I imagine parents think about this, but teachers and CSE members don't lose sight of the fact that at some point you should think about, does this kid need some social emotional support? Maybe it's counseling, maybe it's not formal counseling, maybe it's accommodations, maybe it's I think about one kid I worked with when I was in a high school where he was willing to work with the teacher for some direct reading instruction, but he was really nervous about being seen in her classroom because, for better or for worse, there was stigma. So we let him spend a period with her in the teacher's room. It was in a private area of the school where you couldn't just walk by and see him. I had to work it out with the principal, but they didn't object. And he would go in there because he knew his friends wouldn't see him in there. And that's where he got his support. Is that ideal? No. Did teachers want privacy? Of course. But when we worked with them, right, and we explained why, we made it happen for him. So there should be accommodations for kids, and don't lose sight of the social emotional impact.
And that data is such a valuable part about all that kids and the families have to show that their child, they themselves or their child is healing. This might be a lifelong treatment, but you have to see that you're making if your kid's in 5th grade reading at a 1st grade level, most parents aren't expecting them to be at 5th grade anytime soon. But those increments getting there and making great leaps is what should be really addressed. And so the parents see that the kid is doing better based on the good work that the school is doing and what their kid is doing and what that parent is doing. And so that they feel a little bit better about themselves and feel like they're making the right amount of progress and not so stupid in so many ways.
You also, all of you, I know that we've been on here for a long time. What advice would you give to teachers, coaches in the field right now? 3 things that you maybe want them, or a couple of things you want them to walk away with.
One thing I want to, just because I'm noticing in the comments, it seems to be hard to share our document. Just everybody go to niasp.org, okay? Go to the menu and choose publications and then practice documents. The link is there. It's the second one. I don't know why the link doesn't directly work. That's something I'm just noticing now. I wish I could copy paste it, but it comes up with an error. But if you go to niasp.org, menu, practice documents.
It's actually, if you scroll down, it's right on the home page, Mike. Down, you have to scroll down.
Oh, even better. Okay, thank you, Kelly. And sorry, everybody, we'll get that link fixed. Okay, I'm on it. But if you want it right now, that's what you can do. And then, yeah, so go ahead, Andrew and Kelly, if you want to address Judy's question. I didn't mean to drive us off task, but I did feel like I needed to address that.
I think that we all as educators have to realize that the field is constantly changing. We're constantly learning new things. When I think back to what I learned from my training program in school psychology and to what I know now, 26 years later, it's hard to fathom the changes in the field. And I think that we all need to continue challenging ourselves. And the field of reading has changed so dramatically that teachers really need to try to reach out and do some research and identify appropriate evidence-based practices. And it's okay to ask other teachers, your school psychologists, where do I go to find more information on this? Go to conferences, try to engage in professional development that's not necessarily provided by your school district. Because sometimes those are not really great. No offense to school districts, but I encourage them to just continue learning. There's so much to know. And in order to best serve our students, we have to continually grow and train ourselves.
Yeah. And that if there's any confusion as to what school psychologists are, I don't know, ask us. We're happy to tell you and go through that and explain things and from teachers to other people in the field, from parents to kids. But also they could go to the National Association of School Psychologists to see what a school psychologist is trained to do. And you're going to see that we're trained in lots of different areas. And so I want my administrator to know that I do mental health, that I do group counseling, I do individual counseling. I could work with little ones. I could work, and I don't have to just be relegated to special ed. I had way too many student loans just to work with one part of the population. Yeah. I was going to work with all kids all the time. And so school psychologists do a lot of great things. And if you use them correctly, especially in New York City, where they're just doing assessments rather than really addressing some of the serious mental health issues that are going on there, we're not using our people correctly. And we can
Correct.
do a much better job. And as school psychologists, we have to advocate and don't let anyone else tell you what your role is. Nonsense.
Yeah.
I know my role best. And so I'm going to make sure my administrators know, and I'll be my administrator's ear all the time.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
So, I'm sorry. Did you want to add something to that?
I'm just going to say amen.
Okay. All right. We're going to wrap up. I thank you for being here. I just want to put it out there that a lot of parents have been burned along the way.
Yes.
And not just one year, year after year. And they are frustrated. And so I do want to acknowledge that if they're angry, they often have a reason to be angry.
Yes.
And it's not fun to be on the other end of somebody being angry. But I do think that having been at this for many years, I really can understand why at these CSE meetings, parents cry, parents get upset.
Yep.
It gets to be a really uncomfortable situation. And we really have to think when we're dealing with somebody's child, it
Yep.
could be my child. It could be, and until you feel that, it's a very painful experience. And I thank you for sharing your expertise tonight. I just want to acknowledge that it doesn't always go down like this. And we really have to try very hard to make it more so in the schools that we have professionals like you who are always learning and always willing to grow. It doesn't always happen that way. And that's not just psychologists, that's teachers, that's administrators, that's everyone working with kids, that we have to have that mindset of always growing and evolving. So I do thank you. I think that if there are any other questions that we have not addressed, would you be okay if we pass it along to you at another time? Would that be okay?
People are welcome
Please
to
do.
reach out to me directly if they want. They can find me on the internet.
That's great, Andrew. And our chat is going to still be open and it's live on social media. People will keep adding comments on our YouTube channel. So hopefully, this conversation continues. And I also do agree with what Faith said. Sometimes, even as a practitioner and as a mom myself, sometimes we don't want to feel like we're fighting, but we feel like we're fighting because we feel like our kids' lives are that important and we want them to succeed more than anything else in the world. But
You mean you're being a good parent?
Yeah, exactly. And
how dare
thank
you
guys for joining us today and showing us how much psychologists bring to the table. And let's be
school
honest,
psychologists.
School psychologists, right? And hopefully more and more people realize that we are not alone, that we are not working in silos, that we do have so many people that can support us. And the more we start having these conversations together, hopefully we can, change lives. Please subscribe to our newsletter. It's the No BS Bestie Press. We will also send again this document in our No BS Bestie Press. So follow us for that on www.theliteracyview.com. And also our email, if you have any questions, comments, want to reach out to us, it's faithandjudy@theliteracyview.com. Once again, faithandjudy@theliteracyview.com. This is the grand finale of our Dyslexia Month celebration, honoring students that definitely deserve that attention. Thank you to Hornet and Wasp for being our sponsors of the month. We have appreciated all those giveaways with all those resources. And just because Dyslexia Awareness Month is over, it does not mean these conversations end. Every day is Dyslexia Awareness Day. Every day is DLD Day. There's no such a thing as just one day where we think about these things. These conversations continue for the entire year. Faith, do you have anything else to add?
No, I want to thank you all for being with us, and we will follow up with you. Thanks so much. And if you could put any comments in our Facebook group, the Literacy View Facebook group, that would help as well. This way we're all looking in one place. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thank
Have a
you.
great night.